What's up, hobby friends, and welcome to another hobby hangout. In this video, I actually wanted to take some time and just reflect back and kind of just talk about my Junk Force, the evolution of the army from its beginnings about 6 months ago, the journey through actually creating the army and painting it, how I feel about the army now, and sort of what I expect to add to the collection or grow it in the coming futures, in the coming month and year or years. So really looking back, what originally inspired the army? This would have been probably fall of 2019. I went to a tournament called Capital City Bloodbath in Ottawa with a couple of my friends, and we were sort of brainstorming different army ideas that I could potentially tackle. And we threw around a couple of different ideas, looking at armies that were lower model count, much more elite, but also had like a very broad toolkit in the sense of high mobility, lots of tricks, redeployment shenanigans, things like that. And I think from the very beginning, Kharadron sort of rose to the top. I was never a huge fan of the Games Workshop's aesthetic. I like the idea of the junk ships and guys floating around with their little jump pack suits, but the actual design of the models I felt were a little too busy. And I knew pretty early on that if I was to do the army, it would be either heavily converted or completely scratch built. Fast forward to about 2020, when the General's Handbook came out. They revised a few of the points, but most importantly, they removed realm artifacts, and particularly Aether Quartz Brute. And my Legion of Grief list relied heavily on a command trait and the Aether Quartz Brute to basically farm CP. And that was to feed or to fund the recursion strategy, where I would trade units, remove enemy models, and then bring my guys back and just essentially stack numbers in my favor over time. So with the removal of that, that was basically what kickstarted or jump-started the motivation for me to actually do this army. So why did I choose to scratch build an entire army, and why this particular theme? Well, for those of you who have seen my Necrons, you'll know that I love scratch building. I love creating something new, something unique, either from something that's existing or from the ground up. And one of my favorite things about my Necron army is the fact that it is so unique. When I first came up with the theme and the original mech conversion in 2012, 2013, no one had made anything like it in the world. And while I know that many artists and modelers have been motivated and inspired to do their own mech conversions since, I think I'm safe in saying, and I'm actually kind of proud in saying that because they've applied their own twists and their own variations to their mech designs, that no one has really managed to copy my army. With the addition of some of the newer units like the larger Ghost Ark, my Destroyer conversions, and things like that, no one still has. It's a very unique army, and I'm proud every time I put the army on the table with the attention it brings, that there is no other army in the world quite like it. So when I approached my Kharadron, I went in with the idea that I wanted something similar. I wanted an army that I could uniquely call my own, and that I knew no matter anywhere else in the world that no one would have an army that was anything like it. So that was really a big driving force behind the sort of the why of the project. The inspiration for the army was heavily inspired by two artists. So the first was Ian McHugh. When I began the project, I started grabbing references and building a mood board or a theme board on Pinterest. And one artist whose work kept popping up in the recommendations was Ian McHugh. For those of you who have seen his work, you'll know that they are heavily themed around these junk ships, where they're sort of scavenged from spare parts and they're just sort of haphazardly slammed together. And no two ships are unique. All of his concept art, the designs are so unique and so creative. And I really love that approach. I love the aesthetic of that, and I wanted to bring that into the junk ships of my army. Right around the time that I also started building my robots and thinking about how to paint my ships, I was talking with my girlfriend about the idea of incorporating some graffiti into the details. And she mentioned that my robots had a similar design to Mike Shinoda's graffiti and his doodles. And when I actually went to look at his work, I saw that there were a lot of similarities. Not so much in like outright copying of the design, but in the basic idea of them, I don't want to say the toyishness of them, but there was a playfulness to them that I think there were definitely parallels being drawn between the robots I was making and what I could do. So his artwork heavily influenced quite a few of my robot designs, as well as how I approached the graffiti for the entire army. And like I'm scrolling through my Pinterest board, I know that there are other concept art and other pieces, both for ships and robots, that did inspire the army, but I think these two, Ian McHugh and Mike Shinoda, were basically the driving force behind sort of the design and the artistry and the creative process of the army. One of the things I also wanted to do with this army was to really hone in a few skills, or to learn how to use or do different things. And so I'm not a big sculptor. I mostly scratch build and kit bash, and I definitely wanted to start learning how to sculpt and so sort of build and develop those skills. And so I knew early in that I wasn't just going to be kit bashing these robots, I was going to make them from scratch. I kept them fairly simple. I wasn't too over ambitious with the design, and for the most part they're fairly simple, mostly just like these boxy or round shapes that I've then added details on top of. And so I think looking back, I didn't learn as much, or I didn't develop my sculpting as much as I wanted to, but I think I still gained the confidence to actually just go in there and create something from nothing. I'm definitely seeing a lot as well in the way I'm approaching some of my newer projects, like my Marvel versus Protocol models, where I'm actually more ambitious in terms of my conversions. So the army definitely gave me a confidence towards that. The second was also to learn how to use oils. It's something that I've been researching for quite a while now, but have never really had the, I don't want to say courage, but more so a reason to use them and the motivation or drive to use them. I've been comfortable using acrylics for over 2 decades. I've been comfortable using acrylics. It's my comfort zone. And because I feel like I haven't really unlocked all there is to know or how to use acrylics properly, I haven't really felt that using oils was necessary yet until I was completely comfortable painting in acrylics. But with this army, and I knew with my research that oils can definitely speed up the painting process. For those of you who have watched some of my previous videos, you'll know that I've really been trying to hone in and develop my skills in terms of speeding up my army painting process. So with this army, I wanted to try unlocking oils to see what the process was like, how they would actually speed up the painting process, and if I could incorporate that into my toolbox in the future. And I think one of the biggest and best takeaways from me for this project was the ability to actually use oils, both in doing simple things like rust and weathering and streaking. I've been doing some minor blends and touch-ups with them, but also with the oil washes and defining those crevices and cracks and things like that have definitely given me a lot more confidence and more comfort in tackling armies that would normally take me quite longer, but I can now speed up with oils. One of the original visions for the army as well was really a haphazard or a mishmash of designs and of essentially like robot aesthetics. I wanted to have each robot be its own unique design and not have anything quite like it in the rest of the army. The idea being that these halflings are essentially making these robots from scraps and from junk that they're finding around, and it's very unlikely that they're going to find piles and piles of similar materials. I think over the course of making the army, I was not only comfortable, but I was having quite a lot of fun making particular shapes. And because I was having to bake the Super Sculpey in an oven, I ended up batch making 4 or 5 torsos at a time. Essentially, each unit, I made all the torsos at once, or all the body shapes at once. And so I ended up using the cube, the sphere, and the cylinder quite a lot because they're very basic shapes, and in my mind, they're quite simple to then expand on top of. I think the problem I ran into was that quite a few of the robots ended up being very similar in their look. Yeah, you changed around sort of like the position of the eyes or some of the superficial details that would go on top, or for the engine riggers, maybe the particular design of the arms, but for the most part, the bodies were very, very similar. And so I tried to break them up in terms of how I grouped them in units, how I applied the different color schemes and the markings. But for the most part, there's probably only, I would say, 7 or 8 different body designs. And I was hoping to make more. So I think looking back, that is probably one of my biggest regrets, was speeding through the build process too quickly, and not diversifying the designs as much. But that's also something that I'm looking forward to tackling in units I add to the army in the future. Now that my 2,000 points is done and I can play with them and I'm happy with the way the army plays, I can spend a little more time when I expand and I add things like Thunderers or more Arcanauts or maybe some Skywardens. I can vary the designs a little bit more and take my time in really only building maybe 1 or 2 robots at a time. I think my favorite model in the army still has to be the Ironclad. I was hoping to actually tackle the ship as the final model. I wanted to get everything out of the way first, sort of learn what I wanted to learn in terms of how to build, how to scratch build, and how to paint the army before I tackled its centerpiece. But I think late July, a guy on Instagram called Pax Acrylica challenged me to a friendly duel. And we were basically going to build and paint our own junk ships or scrap ships over the course of 2 months, and then we would have the community vote. I'm calling him out. He never actually finished. He still hasn't finished. So I'm not sure if I win by default or if we're going to reschedule the contest. But in tackling the ship that early, almost at the beginning of the army, it was the first thing I painted. There were a lot of unanswered questions and things that I had to figure out. How I was going to apply the weathering, how I was going to use the oils in terms of modulations, filters, and for the weathering, what my color scheme approach was going to be, just how the ships were really going to turn out, how I was going to mount the ships to their bases, make them look floating but still sturdy enough for transport. I wasn't quite sure how I was going to base the army, and there were all these different questions that when I approached the Ironclad and started painting it, it made me nervous because I wasn't sure if I would properly execute it, and with the ship built, if I screwed it up, it would take quite a while for me to build another version, and I was afraid of, if I fucked up, would I be able to recover? Thankfully, the ship actually came together fairly well. I'm really happy with the way it turned out, and it gave me a lot of confidence to then approach the rest of the army, knowing that not only can I do this, but I can do it well and I can do it quickly. I'm not a huge fan of army grinding because it usually takes so long, but in painting my Junkforce, it actually came together very quickly. The Ironclad took about a month to paint because I had to figure out a lot of different things and do a lot of testing, and just because the model is so big. But when I was painting the rest of the army, the heroes were taking like 2 or 3 days each, and I don't mind that because they're a lot of fun. I was painting probably 5 robots every 2 days. And most of that was in the weathering and the freehand, actually getting the major areas blocked in, blended up and shaded was probably only a couple of hours for all 5 of them. And that was due partly because I didn't cover them in detail, which really helped speed up the process. That was something I really enjoyed. Even the last 2 gun haulers took less than I expected them to. I gauged, or I estimated based on the Ironclad, that I was probably going to have to spend like a week per ship. But I think both of them came together and I finished them in... the ships themselves took 3 days, and then I had to spend another 2 days for the crew and all of the little deck details and things that I had to put on the ships. So yeah, overall, the army came together very quickly. Most of that 6 months of the army journey was spent in really building, and that's, I think, where I enjoyed working in the army. That's where I have the most fun, is in building and converting and scratch building. So really looking forward to expanding the army in the future. Just knowing what I know and being comfortable with the different techniques and materials now. I think the next steps for me in terms of what I want to add to the army, the first is a display board. Now, I know that we're not going to be having any events anytime soon, probably not for the next, conservatively, 6 months. Safely, I would say a year minimum, which probably means I'm not going to Adepticon in 2021. Even with vaccines being as widespread as they are, I think we've, as a group, booked our hotels, but we haven't bought the tickets. I know the tickets haven't gone on sale yet, but we haven't confirmed that we're all 100%. I know that we're all going to play it by ear, and in the almost certain eventuality that we don't end up going, we'll probably defer our hotel reservations till 2022. So there's no rush for me to build a display board, but I have a few ideas in mind, and I want to tackle it now rather than later, sort of get it out of the way. And also because while I'm still in this creative mood, I have these creative juices and these creative ideas floating around. I want to tackle it now before some other project comes along and pulls my attention away. So hopefully sometime this summer I'll build a board. I have a few ideas in terms of building a skyport, sort of like a marketer bazaar where the ships can dock. Different scavenger crews will meet, they'll swap, set up shops to sell and trade their goods. And I've gotten a lot of suggestions for things that I can add to the board, so I'm looking forward to trying to incorporate those. I think insofar as a retrospective, that's pretty solid. I'm not going to really dive into the way the army plays. I've only really gotten about a half dozen games under my belt against 3 different armies, so I can't say if this is going to be the final form of the army. I'm really happy with the way it plays. It's got a lot of tools in its kit, and the sheer mobility and the ability to constantly redeploy and control the board through pressure and through movement. I'm definitely enjoying the way the army plays, although I am seeing a few glaring weaknesses in terms of lack of numbers, an inability to screen, and then a weakness to, well, what happens if I can't shoot my opponent off the board? So as I get more games under my belt and as I play other factions, I'll start to consider changes to the list and what I'm going to add to the collection to be able to swap out units here and there. But that's probably going to be at least, I would say, 6 months away. Until I can get a couple of games against every book in the game, I'm probably going to keep playing the same list. I'll probably dive into my approach to the army in terms of playing the game, sort of my strategies and tactics in a future video. But honestly, I haven't played enough with the army to really give a proper accounting of how the army should be played. So all I can really say is I'm still in the honeymoon phase. I'm really enjoying the way the army plays. I'm glad that I picked Kharadron over any other book to play. So that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, give it a like and subscribe for more weekly content. You can also check out my Instagram at SirJohnTheHo for daily updates on my hobby projects. And at the time of releasing of this video, I will have restarted my Patreon. So if you want to support me as I create more free content for YouTube, and if you want access to a lot more exclusive tutorials on my Patreon, then please go over to my Patreon. The link is in the description below. Sign up. I would really appreciate your support. Until next time, happy hobbying.